Bon après-midi à tous et bienvenue aux audiences du comité de dérogation pour la Ville d'Ottawa pour le groupe 1, secteur urbain. Mes commentaires vont continuer en anglais. S'il y en a qui aimeraient avoir des consignes en français, vous n'avez rien qu'à me faire signe. We are a City of Ottawa quasi-judicial tribunal that holds public hearings to consider Planning Act applications, including minor variances and consent applications, which are the majority of the types of applications, although we do have a permission application on our agenda today. Our hearings are back to being in person. However, the committee can enable remote participation by video conferencing when requested by registered speakers. We are, as you know, live streaming on YouTube, and the video will be archived, and you can, thank you. And you can access both the video and the agenda for future viewing just by going to the committee's website. So my name is Anne Tremblay, and I am the chair for today's hearings. With me today are members, Member Keklian, Member Lecuyer, and Member Blatherwick. In terms of the procedures, the hearings unfold essentially as follows. So there's a list of the agenda. We have quite a few items on our agenda today. We can, at the chair's discretion, move some of those around, and we probably will do them essentially in order once we've dealt with the adjournment items. Just note that sometimes it looks like the panel is dealing very quickly with applications, but all panel members have had a chance to review the materials that have been submitted as part of those applications, including the planning reports, any written submissions, and of course, any submissions in support or in opposition of an application. We also review all of the submissions by the technical agencies that we receive. So today we're going to hear some oral submissions relating to each of the applications where there is a will to do so from the speaker side. As part of the statutory public notification requirements, each applicant is required to post a sign on the property in question before the hearing. And then they're required to confirm in writing that that sign has in fact been erected and fulfilled under the requirements of the Planning Act. Otherwise, we have to postpone the hearing. So I think we have an adjournment on that basis today. So the panel may ask for a brief presentation of the applicant, or we can go straight to asking questions. So we'll open it up first in those situations to the panel members, get them to ask any questions that they may have. And finally, we'll go to the speakers list, and then finally back to the applicant who will have an opportunity to have final comments. So we have a speakers list, and in that case, I do have names and addresses for the record, so I don't need that to be repeated. Just introduce yourself. But if you would like to speak to the committee and you have not registered, then I will need your full name and your municipal address for the record. All presentations are limited to 5 minutes, and any exceptions are at my discretion. So at the end of the hearing on an application, the panel can make either an oral decision or we can reserve our decision. And in the latter case, it means that the decision will not be delivered during the course of the hearing on that application. But however, in all cases, and within 10 days, the Committee of Adjustment will send an official written decision and the reasons for it to all the parties, participants, and anyone who has requested a copy of the decision. So with that, we're going to go to some procedural matters. First thing up is declaration of conflict of interest. Is there any member who has a conflict to declare? I believe we have member Coakley, who's not with us today, who will be submitting a conflict of interest declaration for one of our applications. So I don't believe we have any minutes. Nope, no minutes to confirm at this point. So with that, we can go straight to the adjournment requests, and I've got 2. So let's start with number 6, which is for 626 Tweedsmuir. Now I have as the agent, Ms. McQuaig, but I understand she's not available. So who do we have representing Ms. McQuaig? Nobody in the audience? All right. Oh, Ms. Edwards, you're on mute.
Hello, good afternoon, committee and chair. Tremblay. I am representing Ms. McQuaig, who is unable to attend. And we are requesting adjournment on the basis of scheduling conflict today. And we're hoping to be added to the September 20th agenda if possible.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Edwards? No? All right. With that, then, anyone in the audience, either in person, online, have any comments one way or the other in opposition or in support for this adjournment of this application to September 20th? Not seeing anybody. So from the committee then, all those in favor? All right, for the record, there's a unanimous decision by the committee to defer this application to September 20th. Wish it were June, back to summer. Okay, so with that, thank you very much, Ms. Edwards. All right, so that's the first one. The second one is number 10, which is for 1756 Scott, and it's Mr. Francis. Francis, online. Mr. Francis. Coordinators, do we have Mr. Francis in attendance?
Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Francis is in the audience online. He just needs to accept the invitation to join as panelist.
All right, thank you very much. We'll wait on that. I don't suppose there's any way that we can help push that process. All right, Mr. Francis, not seeing you. Mr. Francis.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you, however.
Well, that's probably just as well. No harm.
All right. Oh, there you are. Thank you.
Okay, I must announce it with some despair. The client is withdrawing the application. It's been adjourned 4 times. 5 times the city has come back with something different. The client has given up in despair. It's cost him about $90,000 in interest in the delays, $14,000 in surveying costs, $5,000 or so in application fees, and God knows what in legal. And the client has given up. He sold one of the properties. He lost the buyer that wanted the parking space. So this matter must be withdrawn. I received instructions yesterday.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Francis. We're very sorry to hear that your client has experienced such challenges in bringing the application to.
So I will never do another severance application. I will never, ever do another. I've been in practice 51 years, and this is the most vexing and frustrating file I've ever had.
So, Mr. Francis, I'm going to invite you then to call the Secretary Treasurer and have a discussion with the Secretary Treasurer about some of the frustrations that you have, because that feedback may in fact help us improve the processes. So
there's no frustration with the committee or the staff. It's the city of Ottawa changing its tune 5 times.
Okay. Well, you do have a complaint process, I'm sure, that you can go through if that's what you would like to do.
I've lost one of my 10 best clients because of this.
All right.
I am very unhappy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Francis. So for the record, we are going to document that the application has been withdrawn, and we'll wish you the best in any follow-up that you can do on this to resolve issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We got it in.
All right, so that takes us to number 1 at this point. And that is for 152 Columbus. And I believe I'm looking for Ms. Hill, who is here today. Good afternoon. Is your microphone on?
There we go.
Just for the record, if you could just give us a brief description of the application. And the other thing we do have to do is a housekeeping amendment, if I understood things correctly. Okay. So from what I gathered, we need to change the frontage on the parcel that's represented by B-00186 to being instead of 7.32 on the notice, to being 7.62.
Yeah, I didn't miss that, but based on the R plan, draft R plan I have in my hand, it does say 7.62.
All right, so we can confirm that correction for the notice.
Yes, please.
All right, perfect. So with that, then I'm just going to give you a couple minutes just to give us a brief overview of the application, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay. So it's a lot in Overbrook, a standard 50 by 100 foot lot on which we propose to build a standard semi. So you've seen hundreds of these applications. This is an application simply to sever the lot in half, and it would be zoning compliant. Could I have the next slide, this is the draft R plan. So it doesn't get much simpler than that. Rectangular lots, it's well-serviced land. It's a simple structure of or orientation of lots. Next slide, please. The site plan as well must look very familiar to you all at this point. So side-to-side semis, 2 driveways. This is designed with carports. Next slide, please. This is the location. So you can see the lot fabric is pretty repetitive here. There's nothing really unusual about the location. Next slide. Some views of the street. Next slide. So you'll see it's in a pretty standard 2-story context. Houses that equally spaced along the street. It would fit in as one would expect. Next slide. The forestry department has reminded my client that he'll need to sort out some tree issues before getting a building permit. We acknowledge that, and that will be undertaken. And as far as I know, doesn't affect the severance. And I think that's it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hill. So questions from the committee? Yes, Member Blatterwick, please.
Ms. Linker, when you reviewed the application for consent, you looked at the 3 requirements for consent that are required to be considered. And the department's satisfied that it meets the requirements.
Thank you for the question. Staff reviewed the application under the requirements from the Planning Act, and we're satisfied that the application met those requirements.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions?
Nope, that's all, Madam Chair.
All right, then we can move on to just the conditions. Any issues? We've got quite a few conditions. Any issues with any of those?
My client has reviewed the conditions, and he's okay with the conditions.
All right, perfect. All right, I don't have anybody on my speakers list for this application. Is there anyone either in the audience or online who would like to speak to this application either for or against? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody come forward. So Ms. Linker, just before we close off on this, any additional information? Just want to make sure I know, and any additional information from your side that we should be aware of?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's no additional information.
All right, well, with that, then it's over to you, Ms. Hill, for final comments.
I don't have much more to say. It's pretty simple and orderly.
All right. sorry. I think what the committee will do then, it is very simple, but we're going to reserve our decision and you'll get the written decision within the 10 days. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you,
And,
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so that takes us to item number 2 for 70 Havelock and 123 Harvey, looking for Mr. Bisson. Mr. Bisson, no? Online then, I guess, we've got Mr. Bisson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bisson. All right, so on this application, the staff has had the panel has had a chance to have a look at this application. I think I'm going to just turn it over, and there's no housekeeping changes required at all. I'm just going to turn it over to the panel for questions at this point. Anyone on this application? Yes, member Vicky.
Question for the agent, just confirming, I saw that there was revised plans submitted, but can you just clarify what changed in the revised plans?
Nothing changed for the requested variance or the severance application, but further information was provided for waste management. And it had to do for the path through the side yard for waste movement, since the other yard is a reduction in setback.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from, yes, member Blatherwick?
Just Ms. Linker, when the first consent was dealt with, section 11.5 of the new official plan wasn't in place. I just want to confirm that the criteria in that section are met.
Thank you for your question. Staff believed that the criteria for the consent was met under the Planning Act.
And then under section 11.5 of the new official plan.
And under section 11.5 under the
All right.
new official plan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so back to you, Mr. Bisson. There's quite a few conditions with this application on the consent side. You've had a chance to see all of those and read all those conditions,
Yes, we have.
and you're okay with all of them?
Yes, we are.
Okay, well, with that then, based on my speakers list, I don't have anyone, oh yes, I do actually have somebody registered, Mr. Castiglione. Do we have Mr. Castiglione? Can we confirm that we have?
Yeah, I'm here. My camera doesn't seem to be working though, unfortunately. But that's okay if you can still hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, and it's fine if your video is not working. So you have the floor, Mr. Castiglione.
Great, thank you. So my name is Phil, and my family and I own and reside in the property next door on Havelock Street. We were very fortunate when we moved into the house 5 years ago, right before the city of Ottawa real estate market really got super hot. Since then, we have seen that our neighborhood has changed in a significant way, and I want to note several large residential projects underway or recently completed within our area, such as Main Street and Echo. There's 2 new apartment buildings on Concord North, the Pointy Building at Havelock and Greenfield, as well as the Frozen Development at 74 Havelock. So our neighborhood's changing, and we understand that, like, this is what the area was zoned for, unfortunately for us. But I want to first off thank the applicant and their team for their hard work on the application and the preliminary design work that you've done. I further appreciate that they have teamed up with a not-for-profit to kind of give this old yellow house one last hurrah before they're being demolished, instead of becoming another empty neighborhood building, such as the properties located on both the northeast and northwest corners of Greenfield and Concord North. I also appreciate the design of the building with limited windows facing the west, and we hope that this design feature is maintained as the design gets more detailed. And it's also worth noting that the existing design will rectify at least 2 areas where the existing building was erroneously built on our property, and we look forward to working with the applicant to confirm how these areas will be reinstated. Even though parking appears not to be required for the current zoning, this continues to be a significant talking point between neighbors. with the proposed development to add significant pressure to an already high demand area. Bike parking, however, is a requirement, with the applicant scheduling 6 exterior parking spots in the rear yard of the building. I understand that based on comments from Mr. Bisson that this area of the design may have changed. However, I will continue reading my prepared statement. To maximize bike use for residents, the applicant should consider making the side walkway at grade, since the current diagrams that were shown as part of the application has a walkway going up and then down on stairs. And access to the rear yard will add an additional level of challenge to accessing a bicycle. An additional upgrade would be to have interior bike storage, which is much more secure. As a bike commuter myself, making access as easy and secure as possible is a significant positive, whether it's the start or end of your route. Having the side walkway at grade will also benefit garbage and maintenance of the new building, avoiding residents or staff lugging garbage cans or lawnmowers up and down the steps. These challenges are exponential in the winter, where snow removal services will have to either push all the snow all the way to the backyard or to the front yard, since the walkway is basically built right to the property line and the new development. So if a copy of the revised drawings could be distributed, that'd be greatly appreciated. I understand that today we're mostly just meeting about the minor variances, and I wanted to provide comment in regards to the figure on page the figure 3 of the applicant's documents, which shows existing minor variances of the side yard and rear yard setbacks in our neighborhood. This is an old neighborhood with legacy buildings dating back, in most cases, 100+ years. My house back to 1880, and the existing building at 70 Havelock, I believe, celebrated its centennial in recent years. These heritage age homes date well before the time of building codes or city bylaws, and most side yard variances are from that era. It was peculiar, though, when I was looking at it, that most or all rear setback variances appear to be from more modern times, where the developers would have had to present their case to a panel such as this, both of which are unfortunate trends, with opportunities to correct only rising every century when the buildings are reconstructed. We understand that old neighborhoods change, and housing is in high demand, particularly in neighborhoods such as ours that is close to the university and significant transit infrastructure. Consideration could be made to provide for a more diverse unit types, which might attract different types of residents, such as families, workers, or professionals, all of which participate in the neighborhood in different ways. The current offering of 16 one-bedroom apartments between 2 buildings is being referred to as Student City by some neighbors. My property is flanked by future development sites, unfortunately, and I do understand where I live, and I'm very fortunate to live so close to downtown. I hope that you consider some of my comments as from the developer side, as well as from the panelists, understanding that decisions we make set precedents to the different properties around me at the same time, and will just contribute to the sustainable development of not only Old Ottawa East, but all the old aging neighborhoods of Ottawa. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Castiglione. All right, so you've raised an awful lot of concerns in that. So first question I'm going to ask is to Ms. Linker. In terms of the type of unit, these are just confirmed for us that in fact the types of units proposed through this development are in keeping with the zoning bylaw permitted uses.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my understanding that the proposal is for low-rise apartment dwellings, and those are permitted use in the R4 zone.
All right, and so the number of units, not a concern in terms of the way that they're looking at creating those low-rise apartments?
That's correct. Low-rise apartments with a maximum of 8 units are permitted on these subject lots.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bisson, the other thing I think I may ask you to do then is we didn't ask for a presentation, but maybe if you could walk us through the site plan and maybe talk about some of these issues. So for example, you know, the one that really resonated with me was some of the site functionality elements that Mr. Castiglione had raised, but also, you know, things like the bike access and issues about trying to get to maneuver on the site, essentially. So could you just walk us through that site plan and tell us how that's going to happen?
Would the revised drawings be available?
If you can see the screen, you can tell me if that's in fact.
Yeah, I think the amended drawings are going to answer a lot of those questions, because the stairs for the side yard were changed to a ramp. So the amendment that we have done to change it to a ramp would facilitate bike access and the moving of waste management through that side yard.
All right, so we're looking at your presentation. So if I understand, like, are you telling me that the site plan that we're looking at right now is not the correct one?
Well, this is the existing, so if we proceed to the next page of the submitted drawings. So the side yard at the bottom of the site plan, those stairs in the amended drawings were changed to a ramp to facilitate access to the rear yard bicycle parking. So unfortunately, this is still the old site plan that was originally submitted. Consulting with the planning department, we had revised the documents and resubmitted them to the committee.
Right, and can you talk about some of the other elements that Mr. Castiglione had raised on site functionality? So
the principle of the side entrances in that laneway is to meet our egress requirements through building code. Once the units, the interior configuration of the units needs two access of exits when they share them. So that's the whole principle of the side yard access and why the stairs and that landing was included. And the requested variance on the north side of the site plan is due to the utilities. So only a small portion of the building is actually going to project into the required yard, and that's to house any metering equipment through Hydro Ottawa. And as previously mentioned, the rear yard, the revision was just the bicycle parking did not change, but the waste management of the site was going to be done through an accessory building where any garbage carts and storage would have to be wheeled up and down the ramp at the elevation where those exit points meet a landing to egress to the passageway towards the street.
all right, thank you. Any questions for either Mr. Castiglione from the panel or in response to Mr. Bisson's description? No? All right, okay, thank you. All right, so that was the only person I had on the list. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak either for or against this application? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody come forward on this. Mr. Bisson, then well, before we go there, Ms. Linker, anything again that we may need to know? Just want to circle back with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will note, I did hear from the neighbor that there is no parking required for the site, but the site is undersized for parking requirements in this zone. So there's actually, or parking is prohibited on the subject site.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so Mr. Bisson, over to you then for any final comments.
I just wanted to bring up that we did receive a comment from Bell that hasn't come up yet. They requested for a 2.4 meter strip of clear access to the rear services. I just wanted to comment that we don't have any concerns or issues with what they're requesting.
Okay, sounds good. With that then, I think we are going to reserve our decision, Mr. Bisson. So you will get the written decision within the 10-day timeframe. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, so we're going to go on to number 3, which is for 11 and 13 Acacia. Looking for Mr. Crapper, Mr. David Crapper. Do we have Mr. Crapper in the audience?
Mr. Crapper.
Ah.
So thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to be before you today, or as you'll no doubt know or hear in a moment again. I'm here today officially to request a granting of a severance application previously granted. City staff has indicated they believe that the conditions and the time frame for them to be met have lapsed. I'll present some evidence to show why I don't believe that's the case. Nonetheless, what you have in front of you is an application for a severance and an easement from the retained lot that would be created as a result of granting the easement or the severance rather to the other property. You have in front of you the application. You've been through it before. Mr. Blatherick would be familiar with it from the first time around. Do you have any questions, or how would you like to proceed?
So the first thing is we have some housekeeping amendments to take care of
Okay.
on the notice. So my understanding is with the reference to the Bell easement. So in the application we have, just to go back to it, it reads that the application indicates that parts 4 and 5 are subject to an existing easement in favor of Bell. And we're going to replace that with
Could the committee pull up the slide on the our plan, please?
So, and I'm going to look to Ms. Lenker to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that we're replacing that with it is proposed to establish an easement right of way over parts 2, 4, 5, and 8 in favor of Bell. Can you confirm that?
I'm just looking at the art plan now. Part 5 is correct. And I believe part 2 is also correct. And part 8 is where the anchor wire would go for a relocated pole. So it's part 4. I'm sorry, it's part 4, it's part 5, and part 8.
And 2.
Pardon me?
So 2.
Oh, and 2, yes. The service is required to connect everybody but us. So 2 is to connect the other guys on the south side.
So I think we've kind of gone around and identified every one of the parts that Ms. Lenker is suggesting, which is 2, 4, 5, and 8 in favor of Bell. So I think we're confirming that.
Bingo. Yes.
All right. Excellent. I don't believe that there's any other changes, but if you could give us a brief presentation, walk us through the differences between what was originally applied for, because we now know that there's an easement requirement, and any other changes that you would have. So just give us a quick overview on that.
It's very quick. There aren't any.
Other than the easement?
What I applied for last time for a severance, I'm applying for again this time. No change. And in addition to that, I'm applying for an easement.
Okay. Does anybody want a presentation on this? No? All right. Okay, so we're going to go straight to questions then. Mr. Crapper, so members of the panel, anything from Mr. Crapper about what's being requested? All right, I'm not seeing any questions. So with that, then there are a number of conditions. Have you had a chance to review the conditions?
I have. If you could switch to slide number. Sorry, bear with me. Slide number 13. There's a condition in the current application process having to do with parkland conveyance or cash in lieu. That was not a condition last time. That condition was absent from the list of conditions that were granted or that were put in place last time out. When I was informed that the Committee of Adjustment considered that the application or the consent had lapsed, I was unaware of the fact that this provision would be a condition of reapplying for severance. Just to give you a rough order of magnitude, that's probably going to be about $50,000 on that piece of property. Now, what happened last time is that there was I understand an understanding given the discretion in the parkland bylaw as written, where it indicates that the conveyance of cash in lieu will be determined at the time of application or the building permit review, whichever is applicable. and identified as a condition of approval in granting either the planning application or the issuance of a building permit. It's my understanding that that was deferred to be collected at the time of the application of the building permit, which is why it is absent in the initial consent that we got. I was surprised to see it in this one. I'm asking for it to be deferred this time as well.
All right, so Mr. Grabber, that's a pretty standard condition on consent applications.
Yeah,
And so I'll tell you, so for us to allow for a deferral to the building permit stage, that would be like a new direction for us in terms of providing that flexibility. So I'm just going to ask Ms. Linker then. Do you know why it wasn't actually part of the original approval?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not certain why it wasn't on the original application. It might have been an oversight on the original application. It's my understanding that at the time of the original application, it was meant to be imposed. Starting in September of 2022 was when cash in lieu of parkland could be collected at building permit for these types of applications. So I don't believe that was the reason why. However, now that the application is in front of us, again, it's a new application and we'd like to consider this condition on the application.
All right, just walk me through that again. So did I hear, correct me, that in 2022, the ability to allow for an alternative for the collection of cash in lieu through the building permit process was introduced only then?
That's correct. That was the date that the parkland dedication bylaw was updated. However, staff have an interest in collecting this amount at the earliest planning application, which in this case is the severance application. It's my understanding that that's because we're not sure if this law will develop in the future. So we'd like to collect it at the earliest chance.
All right, I'm glad that you provided that additional clarification, because my next question to you is going to be, well, are you going in that direction? So, and I think I'm hearing not. So the intent is to leverage this planning process in order to ensure that we have that money collected as early as possible in the development process.
That's correct. And the Planning Act allows staff to collect that at the severance stage.
All right, thank you, Ms. Linker.
can I just make sure that there's absolute clarity around the actual precise wording of the parkland dedication bylaw? Section 3.5 reads, quote, "The parkland conveyance or cash in lieu of parkland requirements will be determined at the time of the planning application or building permit review, whichever is applicable, and will be identified as a condition of approval for planning application or required before the issuance of the building permit." It's not may, it's not shall, it's not and, it's or. It's written in a discretionary way.
Well, I'm glad that you actually read that through for me, because what it actually seemed to allude to for me is that what it's saying is, if there's a planning application, apply it there. If there's no application, the alternative is through a building permit process in order to pick it up. Because the parkland dedication bylaw is not specifically written just for the benefit of consent applications. It's written for the benefit of creation of any additional unit, so that the city has that income or revenue in order to ensure that they can provide the parkland requirements. So in this case, it's interesting that it actually says planning application first. So if you got the planning application, there's your in, or building permit review process. So that's kind of the way I'm reading it, to be honest with you.
So there is no building permit application associated with this, obviously. There's no lot created yet. There's no site plan, there's no development application, there's nothing. We're looking to create a lot. That's it. And last time, I think, set the precedent for whatever reason, oversight or otherwise, that it didn't have to be collected at the point of severance. And all I'm asking for in this case, and I'll get to the reasons why more broadly in a moment, I'm just asking for the same consideration, oversight or interpretation, whichever you wish.
Did you want to continue.
Yeah, so that's my first one. Last time, as Mr. Blatherwick will remember, there was a lot of discussion about a retaining wall at the back of the property, which after 3 hearings ultimately resulted in some wording that seemed to be appropriate around the idea that if as a result of a requirement by the city and as a consequence of a development proposal for that lot, we would have to commit to relocating or modifying the wall at our own expense. Obviously, we would. That if required idea is missing this time. If has become shall. So again, there is no development proposal here. There's no building being proposed. This is the creation of a lot. At the building permit phase, there will be ample opportunity for inspectors and permit officers and so on to consider the actual plans and determine if there is a requirement to modify that wall. Right now, there is no requirement to modify that wall because there is no plan. So I would like the conditions to go revert back to that idea of if required by the city as a result of a development plan. And you see that in the slide before you. The next 2 are easy enough. There is a condition in there, condition number 3, that said there's an auxiliary structure that needs to be demolished. It's gone already. It was gone as a condition of the first one. So there's no permit to be received for that. And the second condition 2 asked that the owner of the property that severed plant new trees on both the retained and the severed lot following construction. Well, if construction happens down the road on the new lot after the time period for this severance has lapsed, then we're not going to make it. So why don't we just consider something like come forward with a plan to plant 2 new trees and leave it at that. No following construction. It's too restrictive given what's likely to come. The last comments I want to make are why we're here today and why I'm taking up your time again. I think you've probably seen this by now, but slide 16, please. As the clock was ticking, after I had appealed 1 or 2 of 6 minor variance requests that accompanied the original severance application and had that request upheld by the Ontario Land Tribunal, we were 8 months into what was initially called a 1-year time commitment. It was subsequently changed to 2 years. And I was afraid we were going to run out of time. So I contacted the planner on the file and I said, I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. What do we do? And he sent me back a note that reads as follows, and I quote, seems the condition timeline is not an OLT choice, but is actually in the Planning Act itself, section 5341. If you feel like looking it up, see below, quote, conditions not fulfilled. If conditions have been imposed and the applicant has not, within a period of 2 years after notice, given under subsection 17 or 24, and I'll come to the subsections in a moment, whichever is later, fulfilled the conditions, the applicant's application for consent shall be deemed to be refused. But if there's an appeal under subsection 14, 19, or 27, I'll come to them in a moment, the application for consent shall not be deemed to be refused for failure to fill the conditions until the expiry of 2 years from the date of the order of the tribunal issued in respect of that appeal. And he concludes his note to me by saying, thus, the timeline for you to meet conditions was reset when you filed the appeal, and you have a 2-year period from the date of the OLT's decision, which was February of 2022. And that note you'll see was sent to me on March 22nd, 2022. Now, because we had met many of the conditions at that point and were dealing with title issues, I was being circled by clouds of circling lawyers. And we got into some discussion about whether or not we were running up to lapsing date again. So one of the things I asked my lawyer to do was to confirm with the staff of this committee that the decision of the OLT essentially reset the clock, and the 2-year time frame would run out in February of 2024. And on the next slide, slide number 17, you see that response. It's an email unsigned from the Committee of Adjustment dated March 2023, March 20th, 2023, to my lawyer, Phil, Phil's last name I can't remember now, copied to a member of the staff. Very straightforward. Hi, Phil. The lapse date for this file is indeed February 2, 2024. Regards, Committee of Adjustment, etc. So I have it in writing from 2 members of the city staff that going to the OLT and appealing one of the decisions of the committee, which was one of the minor variances that was not approved, effectively reset the clock to February 2024. So when I was told this spring that in the context of putting together the application for the easement that my severance had expired, I was, to say the least, a little surprised. I have another piece of correspondence that I sent to a gentleman by the name of Belmar. I gather he's the clerk of the committee, trying to confirm all of this. I have it here, but for the sake of abbreviation, I won't share it. I laid all this out to him. I asked him whether or not this understanding was correct. I never received a response. So that's
Can I
why
ask
we're here
you,
today.
can you just, sorry, and to interrupt you, what was, can you tell me when that correspondence with the Secretary Treasurer occurred?
Pull up slide 21. April 26th, 2022. I lay out the circumstances of the initial consent decision and 6 applications for minor variance, 4 of which were approved, 2 of which weren't. Talked about the appeal to the OLT and how it was granted and upheld, and talked about how our understanding is the clock was reset. I did not say that his staff had agreed with that. I just wanted to confirm that was his understanding as well.
All right, thanks for that. All right.
So I know I'm well over my time limit, and I'm prepared to wrap up quickly. I do have in slide 20 a summary of the relevant subsections of section 53 of the Planning Act, which allow for an appeal, and which talk about if an appeal is made, the consent for approval lapses 2 years after the date of the appeal. Those are sections 19 and 41 specifically. I have them quoted in my presentation as well, if you'd like to see them. The other sections that are referenced in some of that earlier email from Mr. Nadeau, sections 14, 27, 29, 33, 17, 23, 24, 29, and 33, I've been through in some detail. They're not applicable. I've got them in the presentation. Staff can look at that and satisfy themselves of that if they wish. So, so I'm arguing essentially that an appeal is an appeal, and that in appealing 2 minor variances that were not granted as part of my severance request, I effectively managed to reset the clock, or the clock was essentially reset. And if the argument coming back is you've got 2 decisions here, you've got a consent decision and you've got a minor variance decision, and thou shalt not meet in the same way, I ask you this question: can you have a legitimate legal consent severance decision where one or more of the lots is not in conformity with the existing bylaws and has not been granted a minor variance? Let me put it the other way. If I had not appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal the two minor variances that were not approved, if I had not done that appeal, would I have a legitimate severance? And if the OLT had agreed with the original planning committee decision not to grant those two variances, would I have a legal severance? The answer, as far as I can tell, is no. In this case, these minor variance requests are essentially conditions, de facto conditions. And I'm here because it was my understanding from staff of the city and my reading of the Planning Act and my lawyer's reading of the Planning Act that we were not out of time. So in concluding, Madam Chair, I can simply say for the record, and again, it's in the presentation on section and slide 23, all the substantive conditions in that initial decision had been dealt with. What we were dealing with at the time was simply the paperwork associated with the title issues, including dealing with the banks and so on and so forth. So we were blithely working away on all of this in the hope and expectation that we were going to get this thing across the finish line with a little bit more paperwork, but all the substance was done. So in summary, I'll simply say to you, and I summarize this in slide 24, our company, I and my lawyers, the Planning Act, and as you've seen, city staff do not believe that our consent has lapsed. However, if you disagree and if you require a new consent for the severance, I request that the same severance originally granted, including the absence for whatever reason of the cash in lieu in Parkland, also be absent. And if the if the committee is to pose any other conditions, they be no different from those originally proposed, and that we get some relief from the conditions that we've already met. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry for going too long.
No, Mr. Crapper, this has been a really interesting presentation. So thank you for being so well prepared and being able to convey that information in a very logical manner. So I've been on the committee a long time. This is the first time I've had somebody come forward and make some of these comments and raise these questions, because you're quite right. I mean, when the committee looks at creating lots that are non-conforming, of course we want the minor variances, otherwise we wouldn't create the lots. So they do go hand in hand. So with that, then, to be honest with you, at this point, I would need to have a lot of information verified. So, my first question is, where did Mr. Nadeau, so he made statements in his email, but what was the source of his statements? Did he go to legal services? Did he get that information?
Forgive me, but if you're asking me the question, I'll tell you simply. If it's rhetorical, I'll let you go. But if you're asking me, it's in the Planning Act.
Okay, so we would still rely on legal services to give us some guidance on this typically, right? So we would say, all right, so this is a chicken and egg. So which way does the city see the interpretation of that? So because we've, clearly we've been given guidance that nope, they, as far as we're concerned, they did lapse. Both applications had to come back. And that's why you're before us. But in actual fact, if only one, if staff is saying that the consent application didn't lapse, then we don't even need to hear that one. We would only be hearing essentially the minor variances again. So,
correct.
So I'm going to go to our Deputy Secretary Treasurer to just provide us with what the committee's position would be on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee staff's position is that the applications have lapsed. I'm aware of correspondence from the Secretary Treasurer to City Planning staff confirming that simply based on the reference as the applicants highlighted to section 5341, which indicates that if conditions have been imposed, if they have not, within a period of now 2 years after notice was given of the decision, fulfilled the conditions, the application for consent shall be deemed to be refused. But if there's an appeal under subsection 14, 19, or 27, all three of those subsections are opportunities for an applicant to appeal with respect to consent. And then it goes on to say it would not lapse until the date of a tribunal's decision. So In this case, there was no appeal under subsection 14, 19, or 27. The appeal was under 4512, which is highlighted at the outset of the tribunal's order. In some instances, consent applications may depend on variances. In some cases, they may not. My understanding is it was a condition of the consent that the variances be approved and finalized. So procedurally, they were tied together in that way. But per 5341, the timeline was effective when the decision of the Committee on Consent became final and binding. The applicant was notified that that decision was final and binding on June 21st, 2021, following the 20-day appeal period of the decision on consent.
May I respond to that?
Actually, no, let me ask my questions.
Uh,
I'll come back to. So, Mr. Garrett, I'm trying to then understand. So what we're saying is that there would have had to have been something like an appeal undertaken of the consent in order to stop that timeline. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's correct, Madam Chair. The Planning Act language is prescriptive here in saying that the mechanism for effectively extending, if an appeal is allowed, the 2-year timeline for fulfilling conditions is an appeal under 5314, which has to do with the committee rendering decision in 90 days, 5319, which is the decision on the appeal, or 27, which is a change of condition. All three of those have to do with the consent process. In this case, there was no appeal under 5314, 19, or 27.
Well, and it logically follows that if that variance was not given, there would be no consent. And the decision that was appealed was the decision that would have affected the nullification of the consent. And I point out, for the benefit of the committee, that section
Excuse me, Mr. Yes, if you could take your call outside, please.
Section 5341, which the gentleman just quoted, reads, quote, if there is an appeal under section 14, 19, or 27, the application for consent shall not be deemed to be refused for failure to meet conditions. So what does section 19 say? Section 19 reads as follows: the applicant, the minister, or a specified person or public body may, not later than 20 days after giving notice under subsection 17 is completed, appeal the decision or any condition imposed by the council or the minister, or appeal both the decision and any condition to the tribunal. So at no point does it say in any of this that it's related only to consent decisions. And at no time does it rule out appealing on the basis of minor variance decisions. It simply says may appeal the decision. That's what section 19 says. You're right in terms of the other sections. They talk about timelines and appeals under different circumstances. But this does not say that it applies only to consents and doesn't apply to minor variances.
All right, so where that leaves us is that we need more information, because to me, I'd like to get more clarity about, I think, and you've raised excellent arguments. So I would like to get something from staff, whether it's through committee staff or through city staff, that would provide us with more direction on that, and more consideration on your comments. And so you're well prepared. I take it that you have had these discussions with either Ms. Linker or somebody maybe higher up in the planning department?
To a point. If this application were not to cost me $50,000, I'd shut up, reapply, and just be done with it. But the inclusion of this parkland cash in lieu issue is going to cost me a lot of money. And so I'm saying, look, I've got it in writing how this works from the city. And I'm not going to put up with having to pay $50,000 for an oversight. Somebody's mistaken in person in.
Mr. Crapper. So, all right. So I think the first thing we need to forget the conditions. I just want to find out what we're dealing with in terms of an application.
Okay.
So
It's over to you. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess what I'm saying to you is if you grant the severance application with the same conditions as last time, I can live with that.
yeah, and so that's the problem, I think, in the sense that I heard your arguments on the condition for cash in lieu. So one of the other sort of elements that the committee considers is when somebody comes forward for a consent application, we really need to know why. So the first question, when you said to me, I'm not doing anything, we're not going like there's no proposal. Okay, so then my question is, why not wait and do your severance at the time that you actually know what development you're doing so that we understand what the consent is actually going to be used for? And so typically it makes sense that if you're going to do a subdivision of land, anytime you have a plan of subdivision, it's very clear where we're going with that. We're creating housing, so if we do a consent to sever of land, what's the purpose of that consent? So the committee, it's fair for us to ask those questions and say, well, what are we really approving here? If you're telling me there's no intent to go, it's going to be future development, future residential, but it'll be 10 years from now, then my first question is, why aren't we waiting for 10 years? Then come back to us when you have a proposal.
Well, where does it require me to wait for 10 years? I mean, with respect, I mean, I understand your argument.
I'm not saying that you need to wait to 10 years, but
No.
you're telling me that you've got no proposal on the table right now.
I'm going to sell the lot. This is an investment for us. And I want to do it soon because this is part of our retirement plan. I don't buy green bananas anymore. I don't know what I'm going to be here in 10 years. So that's why.
Right, so where that leaves us is, and I'd love to get thoughts from the committee about how to proceed, but I feel I need more information based on your excellent submission to us orally today, Mr. Crapper. I would like a deferral, 2 weeks, if that's all right. And I would ask to ensure that we get either from planning staff or from committee staff some resolution, first off, whether or not your consent has actually lapsed. I think we know what we're dealing with on the minor variance side, but has your consent lapsed? Because if your consent has not lapsed, then we don't even have an issue with those conditions.
Correct.
So let's see what we're dealing with. And if I could ask you, Mr. Garrett, then to come back.
Yes, Madam Chair, we'll seek confirmation and additional material for the committee.
All right, thoughts from the panel? Ms. Member Lekeyi?
Madam Chair, just on the discussion of the easement, because that is something new and different from the previous one. Can we talk about that, or do we want to reserve that for the other?
Well, so if the application, the consent application stands, then that would be a new application for Mr. Crapper, and then the other conditions would be fair game. So that would become a decision. Do you really need that easement? What are we talking about in terms of this easement? Because otherwise, maybe you're into a new application anyhow.
Is there a record for how many you can put forward? I mean.
No, you could, theoretically, again, Mr. Garrett, you're going to need to help me on this, but there could be a submission just for the creation of an easement.
Well,
let's get Mr. Garrett to respond.
That's correct, Madam Chair. So in this case, we have one application requesting consent for multiple transactions, one of which is the severance, one is establishing easements and rights of way. An application could theoretically come forward only seeking an easement or right of way. In this case, they've been filed together.
All right, and that's interesting because if that happens, we're just exploring here at this point. Ms. Linker, if I understand things correctly, then that application would be just for an easement and therefore cash in lieu would not apply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my understanding.
Okay, so we have some opportunities here based on what we find out from our committee staff. So with that then, yeah, go ahead.
One last point of clarification. I was told when I was informed that the conclusion was that the consent had lapsed, I was informed that I was going to put in an easement application anyway, and that I could reapply for consent as part of the same application with no additional cost. So that's when I combined the two of them. I don't know whether that's germane to your considerations, but that's why you have the paperwork you have in front of you.
I take your point. Typically it would be cheaper, obviously, to deal with them together under one application if the conclusion is in fact that the application has lapsed, and we would let it stand that way. If in fact it turns out that your application for consent has not lapsed and you want to add the easement, then that's a discussion about whether or not there's a requirement for recirculation on that, because in this case, and again, Mr. Garrett, because we wouldn't be increasing the request as part of the consent. We're in fact decreasing it. We're removing a piece. Would it require recirculation?
Madam Chair, it would ultimately be up to the committee. However, the Planning Act does allow consent applications to be amended at any time before consent is given. Also, we would be removing a component. So it may be that the committee would determine that the purpose and effect has still been met in terms of highlighting the easement requests.
Perfect. I think that's the answer. Okay. Any other questions from the panel on this before we adjourn? So last words, Mr. Cropper?
I realize that this is not a standard hearing, and this is not a standard application process. And I appreciate your time and interest in it. And anything I can do to help you in your considerations, I'm happy to do so. And I appreciate the assistance we've had from the city staff. And I look forward to moving forward in a constructive way. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks. I just have to go out to the public because as part of the process, I still have to ask whether there's anyone in the audience, either online, that has any comments, concerns, either in opposition to the application or in support of the application for an adjournment, because now it's become an adjournment to September 20th. Anyone? All right, I'm not seeing anybody come forward. So from the committee, all those in favor of the adjournment? Okay, for the record, it is unanimous. So we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Am I expected to make a presentation at that point?
No, I think we've had a lot of discussion at this point. So we would just bring it back, do essentially a summary of where we're at, what the direction has been and what we're dealing with, and we'll move on from there.
And the possibility of a decision at that point, or?
Yes, yeah, there'd be a possibility of a decision for sure.
A likelihood or a possibility?
No, a likelihood, as long as we have the information that we need.
Okay.
It's always a great likelihood. We just want to make sure we have the right information. So thank you. We appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. All right. Let's move on then to application. Hang on here. I just got to write some notes just so I don't lose this. Okay, so now we're on to 4, and 4 is, in fact, we're going to deal with 4 and 5 together. So 60 and 62 Pontiac, and I'm looking for Ms. Libman.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
I am just trying to move you to my proper screen so that I'm looking at you. There we go.
Okay, so Ms. Libman, I think we're going to ask just for a quick overview of what it is that you're proposing, because it looks like we're trying to make something better out of something that's a bit of a mess at the moment. But can you walk us through it?
Yes, you're quite right. That's the hope. So maybe we can start at slide 4. So here you can see in the red outline, number 60 Pontiac, and you'll notice it's a little bit hard to see, but you will notice that the lot line continues down beyond the green, so that 62, which is outlined in green, has frontage only on Pontiac Street. It doesn't reach out to Cowley Avenue. That's a 30 centimeter depth that 60 Pontiac reaches down. Maybe the next slide is actually clearer. So we can see it here again. So 62 Pontiac was severed from 60. 62 is part 1 on this plan, and part 1 stops just shy of Cowley Avenue. So that's where we're at legally today. That's not really how things are being used, or not at all how the properties are being used. If we go to the next slide, we'll see what we have proposed. And this shows the buildings, the existing shed down in the corner. And so what we're hoping to do is to sever part 4, which is what we refer to as the panhandle, from 62, which is the green lot, and add it to 60, which is the red lot. I'll say in exchange, but it's not really an exchange. It's just another part 2 there is a small rectangle that is encroached upon by the shed of 60 Pontiac. And so there would be, that's another lot line adjustment application. So what you see before you there is how the lots would be post severance, and it's how they're used today. With one variation, which is that you see down part 4, there's a dash X. That's a chain link fence that runs down the middle of part 4. And the owners to the south actually have been using that section. But my clients have discussed this application with them, and they're happy enough to have the applications proceed in the way that we've filed them. For a bit of context, I guess, the owners of lot 60, which is my clients, had an oral arrangement with the owner of 62 that this would be clarified, but unfortunately the owner of 62 passed away. The owners of 124 Cowley, which is the property to the south, have also passed away. So we're dealing with the estate trustee of 62 Pontiac and the adult children of the previous owners of 124 Cowley. So our clients have filed these applications, taken on significant investment just to legalize or formalize what was always the intention of all of the owners. So if we pop down a few slides to slide 8, we see the variances that are required. So dealing first with 60, which is the property on the corner, we need to, nothing really comes out of the application except for the minimum rear yard area, which has always been under, and that non-compliance is being increased by 2.2 square meters just through that small rectangle part 2. While we're at it, we also thought we would regularize the minimum corner side yard setback and minimum rear yard setback, which are current situations, but included in the application. The next slide, slide 9, is just an image of where those variances are. So you'll see variance A at the top, the 3.46 corner side yard. Variance B in the back being the 58 square meter rear yard area, and variance C being 2.96 rear yard setback, which is existing. So the only one that's being increased here is the rear yard area, variance B, and that's because of the giving away part 2. Next slide, please. So for 62 Pontiac, an existing situation of non-compliance is the lot area, the minimum lot area, which is being further reduced. It may be that when the lot was created, that panhandle reaching almost out to Cowley was created to give them a little bit more lot area. That could be, but I haven't been able to determine that. And in any event, the house has been functioning for many years without the use of that land. The second variance is the minimum interior side yard setback, which is an existing situation. And the third variance is the minimum accessory building building setback in a rear yard, which we're moving forward from a situation of encroachment to a situation of non-compliance. So if we look at the next slide, variance D, or it's variance A here, is the lot area. We're seeking a reduction to 385.8 square meters. Variance E is that interior side yard setback that is an existing situation, not getting any worse. And then variance F, we're seeking the 0.25 setback. There are 3 setbacks around the corner of this existing shed, 0.25 meters being the least. And as I said, this is currently an encroachment onto the property of 60 Pontiac. So in my view, it's also being made better through the lot line adjustment application. I think that summarizes the applications.
All right, thank you, Ms. Libman. Any questions from members of the committee? Nope, I think we all agree that it's a better situation once we get through this. So, okay. And there are a number of conditions to this, Ms. Libman. I have a note here that there may be a concern with one of them.
Yes, if my presentation could come back up. And we'll just move to slide 17. Ooh, back one, oops. This one, yeah. So I'm just showing you again that the existing lot configuration in the top corner is that 62 Pontiac has frontage only on Pontiac Street. Nothing is changing with regards to the street frontage of either property. And so the condition seeks proof that each lot has its own separate water, sanitary, and storm sewers. And there's really no reason to expect that they don't already, because there are, if we go to the next slide, Geo-Ottawa shows that there are sewer, water, and storm sewers running along Pontiac and Cowley Avenue. And I have received confirmation from the owner of 62 Pontiac that their shutoff valves are close to Pontiac Street. I don't have definitive proof in the form of a report. I just have sort of the common sense thinking that why would they cross existing property lines? We're not changing any street frontage. And so I'm hoping that the committee will not impose this condition. Practically speaking, as I mentioned, we're dealing with the estate of 62 Pontiac. 62 Pontiac will be listed for sale tomorrow as soon as we don't have our committee of adjustment signs posted anymore. They're hoping to post their for sale sign. We've been very fortunate in dealing with the estate trustee that he has been cooperative and understood from his client, Ms. Watson, before she passed away, that this was her intention. If we have to go, I understand that what I need is a ground penetrating radar locate. I don't know how long it will take to get that or how much it will cost to get it. But we introduce a bit of risk to my client, who is doing this application entirely on his own. The risk is that when the property is under the care and control of the estate trustee, he will sign our transfers and we will be able to perfect the consents. The risk comes in if the purchaser, even though they're being told what they're purchasing is the post-severance condition, we may run into a problem there in finalizing the consents. So that being the case, because I see no practical reason for the condition, even though I understand that it is a standard condition, I ask the committee to consider not imposing it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Libman, for that overview. Any questions about that condition? So, Ms. Linker, we do see this condition fairly frequently. But I'm wondering what your thoughts might be based on Ms. Libman's arguments that perhaps this is, that there'd be no real value in the sense that we already can see that that servicing seems to be in place independently.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Ms. Lippin noted, this condition is to confirm that these services are separate between the lots when the lots do, or the lot lines do change. Staff are requesting this condition just to have that comfort that there won't be any services provided for 62 Pontiac on the property of 60 Pontiac post severance.
And if there were, then it would be an easement requirement, would it not? Over in favor of a property, is that what you're suggesting?
That's my understanding, that an easement would be required to provide services over another property.
All right, thank you. Okay. Thoughts from the panel? No, we'll come back to that. Thank you. Any other conditions, Ms. Libman?
No, I believe the only other condition is the standard lot line adjustment condition. And we're good with that.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So we're going to go out to the public at this point. And I do have Ms. Pearl on my list. So I'm going to give you the floor then. You've got 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm co-chair of the Champlain Park Community Association, and years ago when they first put in place the application, the geo maps application, being a nerd, I went to it and I became totally familiar with it, and I noticed a number of anomalies in the neighborhood. It's an old neighborhood. You get strange things happening over 100 years of occupation, and nobody knows why this strange little piece of land was severed. Doesn't even go to Pontiac or Cowley. It stops short of it. Nobody knows why it's there, but we also can see that the Cowley house from the very beginning actually encroached on the property that was originally part of that. So our issue that, well, as far as we're concerned, we have no issues with this. It's simply regularizing a property that is odd. It's a better layout for both properties. It meets the desires of 62 Pontiac. The owner has dealt with the owners at 124 Cowley. So basically, the 3 detached dwellings are existing. The development, no redevelopment is proposed, and approving the consents and minor variances will allow the owners of 60 and 62 Pontiac Street to disentangle a known, long-standing, anomalous situation and extend reasonable protection to the owners of the existing home at 124 Cowley Avenue. So nobody's in disagreement that this is a good move for this property. I do not believe that, based on what I see on GeoMaps, it does not appear that there are any services that are shared between 60 and 62. So I'm perfectly happy if this is completed today. This would be great.
Oh, I'm so glad that you added that piece at the end there where you said, based on my view of the Geo Ottawa, it looks like there really isn't any servicing issue, because you started your presentation with, well, I've, looked at Geo Ottawa and I've seen a lot of anomalies. So my first thought was that you were going to tell me that,
no. No, I'm just saying you may see me here again because there are other anomalies, but I think this was just the most strange one.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Then we do appreciate your input and the words of support. We don't hear it often. So thank you for taking the time to speak to the committee on that. Okay, so I'm just going to see whether or not there's anybody else. Is there any questions for Ms. Pearl? Oh, Mr. Blatherwick, go ahead, please.
Ms. Libman.
Yes.
If we grant this consent, how are we going to deal with the encroachment of 124 Cowley onto 60 Pontiac?
So my client has spoken with the owners of 124 Cowley, and they've entered into an agreement whereby they will be permitted to keep that encroachment for the life of the building.
This will be a legal agreement?
It's an agreement that they've signed together, and I have reviewed it. It's not registered on title.
Why not?
Because I don't believe it's required to be, and I don't know if it could be. It's a private agreement between landowners.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't creating a problem.
Well, I think if the property changes hands, then there could be a problem because the encroachment will stand and the agreement won't be with the new purchasers. So
yeah, fair enough. But the encroachment has been there, as Ms. Pearl pointed out, since time immemorial. I think 124 Cowley Avenue was quite possibly the original house on this whole corner lot.
yeah, it sounds like there is an awful lot of history here. So, okay. Any other questions, Mr.?
No, that's all. Thank
No?
you.
Okay. I'm going to make a call out then, a general call out to the public. Is there anyone who either online or in person, although we don't have too many people in person today, that would like to speak to this application either for or against? Okay, I'm not seeing any at this point. So I'm going to go back to the question of the removal of condition number 1. I'm going to propose that Ms. Libman's arguments were compelling and that we should look at removing it, but I'd like the input from the rest of the panel. All right, support, Mr. Okay, and Member Keckley again? All right, okay, so with that then, we are going to consider this application with the removal of condition number 1. So the only condition that would stand would be condition number, I guess it's the number 2, which is to do with the, which has to do with the lot line adjustments. Okay. Final words, Ms. Libman?
No, with that said, I'm quite happy for you to consider the applications.
All right. And Ms. Linker, anything final from you before we move on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's nothing further from city staff.
All right, thank you. So Ms. Libman, we're going to reserve on the applications. So you will get the written decision within the required timeline. So within 10 days of the decision.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move on to number, I think we're on to number 7 at this point. Okay, number 7 is 531, 533 Broadhead. Looking for Mr. Abdel Nian. I hope I didn't do too badly a job.
Way better than other people. It's all good. Thank you.
All right, so the committee has had a chance to look at the material, but we're going to ask you for a brief presentation on this, if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure. Computer is decided to that's okay. I'll just be looking at the screen. So good afternoon, everyone. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for your time today. This is just going to be hopefully a quick and brief presentation on requests for a minor variance for front-facing attached garages on a set of semi dwellings. If we can skip to slide 3, please. Perfect. So this is just the location of the subject property. It's within Westboro area, surrounded by a lot of parcels that are the same size and same fiber. Next slide. The requested variance is for a front-facing attached garages where the streetscape analysis does not allow for one. I'm sure you've seen this quite often in the past. The proposal on this one does conforms with all of the other zoning bylaws, so no requirements for any changes to the setbacks, building height, landscaping, parking. It's just to allow for the front-facing attached garages. Next slide. So this is the site plan. As you can see here, one thing that I wanted to note on the site plan is the rear yard setback is a little bit farther away from the back of the building, and this is something that I'll talk about later. Basically, what it means is we didn't utilize the full depth that we were allowed to utilize on the development, giving more rear yard space for the tenants to enjoy. And again, other than the front-facing garages, there is no other variances that are requested on this proposal. Next slide. Surrounding context. So the subject property is located in a neighborhood mainly consisting of detached dwellings and semi-detached dwellings on similar sized lots. There's a mix of newer homes and older homes, but the majority of the homes within 5-minute walking distance. I did a rough count of over 150 homes within 5-minute walking distance have front-facing attached garages in that area. The majority of the neighboring properties within 1-minute walking distance have front-facing attached garages in that area, as I'll be demonstrating later. And the property directly located north of that, where I actually personally reside, is also a semi-detached dwelling with front-facing attached garages. Next slide. We believe that our proposal meets the 4 tests, so I'll try to talk about them quickly, but I understand the importance of them. So we believe that the proposed development supports the intensification requirements by providing additional housing and diversifying the housing options, maintains a good ground-oriented built form with family-sized units that fit well within the neighborhood. So with that said, we believe it meets the general intent and purpose of the official plan. General intent or purpose of the zoning bylaw is also maintained. It's an R3R property. So we're building or proposing to build a semi-detached dwelling with secondary dwelling units, and it meets all of the other zoning bylaw requirements, and we believe it meets the general intent of the streetscape character analysis. The variance is desirable for the appropriate development or use of the property. So the urban design guidelines, we believe that the proposed development is desirable for the area and in line with the fabric of the general neighborhood. The proposed front-facing attached garages will enhance the visual impact by reducing the impact of cars parked outside, similar in the case of what is permitted as of right, which is the cantilevered option, what others have here called it before, mushroom option, where basically the cars will be parked in front of the house. This one would encompass the cars inside the house and also any of the other storage material that typically are within the garages, such as garbage cans, bicycles, and anything like that that would be stored within the garages. And the variance is minor in nature. So in our opinion, the variance requested is minor. The construction of an attached front-facing garage is a dominant feature in the neighborhood, despite the result of the streetscape analysis. And in addition, the neighboring property where, again, I reside has front-facing attached garages, which I'll be showing later. The current design, as I'll be demonstrating later as well, has very minimal impact on the front facade. And I would like to speak to that about that in the next slide there. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is the neighboring property right north of the property that we are discussing today. As you can see on this property, the garages, the front-facing attached garages, is a very small percentage of the front facade. Additionally, the balcony above it and the walls that are extruding outside of the garage really hide the garage doors within the front facade and minimizes the impact of the garages. If you walk a little bit north or south of that property, you can barely see the garages because those walls extend about 10 feet past the garage door entrance. So we really like that feature, and it received really good feedback from all of the neighbors that we were able to meet with on the street. So we're sort of copying that design again on the proposed development. Next slide. So this is the surrounding neighborhood. As you can see here, there's 43 properties highlighted in yellow from the proposed property that have front-facing attached garages. Had we been allowed to stay within our block for the streetscape character analysis and not cross the street, we would have been allowed front-facing attached garages. But I know that's not the case on how the streetscape character analysis is to be conducted. We would have to cross the street and take the properties across the street into consideration. And when we did that, obviously the streetscape character analysis determined that there was no front-facing attached garages as the dominant feature on the street. One thing that I wanted to note is on this side of the street where the subject property is, it's an R3R zoning. On the other side of the street is a different zoning. It's an R2G. Next slide, please. So just around the corner from the street, again, within the same block, these are the properties that are built just literally around the corner. That house on the right there in the brown brick, sorry, on the left in the brown brick there, on the right side of the picture on the left is literally on the corner of the street. So you can see all the houses that are on that side of the street have front-facing attached garages. And same thing with the houses on Clare, a lot of them have front-facing attached garages as well. Next slide. So this is the proposed development, very similar in design to the property north of it. The garage is going to be hidden again underneath the front balcony and underneath, in between the extruding walls. What this was going to result is, the front facade is mainly going to be dominated by the architectural features that are not the front facing attached garages. And the fact there won't be a lot of garbage cans or cars parked in front of it will increase the curb appeal of that proposed development as well. Just simple numbers to note is that based on this current design, we minimize the door as much as possible, and it only results in 15% of the front facade being consumed by that front-facing attached garages. And if we walk a little bit north or south of that property, you will not be able to see the front facing garages only when you're standing right in front of the property. Next slide, please. So this is just a comparison. This is a photo of a presentation that was done here before. It's basically of a house just one block down, and it shows the other option that is permitted as of right. Cantilever option where the building is asymmetrical. There's cars parked in the front of the house, not hidden within the garages. Potentially, some garbage cans that can be left on the side of the house. Again, this is the property that is north. You can see that it's a little bit cleaner looking, much more curb appeal. And that also is the opinion of the majority of the neighbors on the street. Next slide. So one thing that I wanted to note is I did meet with the forestry department and the planning department yesterday. And based on the current design, we were able to find a way to retain the tree that is in the back of the house. It goes back to my comment about the rear yard setback that we were not able to utilize, we were able to design this property and not utilize the full depth that we are allowed to without any variance. And by doing so, we were able to retain that tree in the back. And what we did is we don't need any changes to the design. The design will stay the same. We'll just work with the forestry department on site to make sure that there's proper retainage at the building permit side of things in order to be able to retain the tree. And I believe this made a lot of our neighbors happy, including some that I met today, that were happy to know that that tree will be retained. It's a 70-plus-year-old tree. Just a note, if we were to develop this property utilizing anything that we're allowed as of right, such as the cantilever option or a long semi, which is allowed in an R3R zoning, it takes away from the width of the building at the front, which means that we'll potentially have to expand the building depth. And that would result into us, without requesting any variance, just pushing it all the way to the rear yard setback that we're allowed to be at. And unfortunately, that means that tree will probably not be outside of the excavation limit at that time. I personally walked the street and talked to all of the neighbors that I could meet at the time. As you can see from the documents that you have, we've got 15 letters of support, including obviously the property that we own. And all of the neighbors are supporting, 15 of the neighbors on the street are supporting the development. They're supporting the front-facing attached garages in comparison to the other options that are permitted as of right, or no garages at all, which is going to result into more on-street parking on a smaller street like that. We're already having issues with snow clearing in the winter and whatnot for any cars that are parked on the street. I do understand that we received a letter of concern yesterday from one of the other neighbors. I did try to meet with her yesterday and had a brief discussion to try to address her concerns, basically making the same argument that I'm making in front of you right now, that is her concern is the streetscape character analysis, which is really what we are asking relief from today. And I think in conclusion, I hope I made good enough of a case that the requested variance meets all of the 4 tests, and that if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdelnayan. Any questions from the panel members?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
So
member.
to clarify the design, is that the reason why it's pulled so far to the front is to retain the tree as an option in the back?
So the design as it stands right now is not pulled to the front any more than any design would be. We are extruding with some architectural elements to hide the garage on purpose. The design as it stands, we're utilizing the width that we're allowed on the lot to build without any required variances, and that gives us enough square footage within the property to not need to extend all the way to the back and retain the tree by doing so.
And then to just clarify you're copying the design of the development immediately next door, like
Very, very, very similar. The only difference is little architecture elements that are different. We're not doing a flat roof. We're doing a pitched roof on this one. Again, more in line with the fabric of the neighborhood, and just small architectural color differences so it's not a copy paste.
Okay, thank you.
Other members? All right, Ms. Linker, can somebody bring back there was one slide that was really compelling. It showed essentially I think the existing example that was provided that where I think we're looking at that one. And, so I'm looking at Ms. Linker's observations on this. So notwithstanding the streetscape analysis, I was trying to look at, well, what's really the intent then? Because you can't say that this proposal doesn't look good. It looks good. But front-facing garages, so that the official plan looks to ensure that there's engagement on the street. So it looks like, based on what I'm reading, is, these attached, front-facing attached garages often push the livable area. I think we're seeing that here, of the dwelling up towards, up from the road. So the engagement portion that I'm seeing on this is then that balcony portion that's over what would be that front-facing garage. If you look on the other side, they're at grade. So, Ms. Linker, I would imagine that in my understanding, what the intent of the official plan policies is to have this on the left, this type of like street engagement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The image on the left is zoning compliant, as it is permitted under the zoning bylaw with single wide driveways and no front facing attached garage or carport. The official plan requires that or encourages that development is not dominated by the presence of the vehicle, such as a front facing attached garage. And the intent of the zoning bylaw, as you were saying before, was so that the livable area is not pushed upwards and towards the rear of the property, that it's allowing for full engagement with the street in these urban areas.
Thanks for that. I'm also looking at another example that was part of your report on its figure 3. It's again, is that the same property as the one I'm seeing in the, okay. So what's interesting about this is the one in your presentation is very close, whereas the one in your report's actually a little bit further back. So you get a better sense of what the street engagement portion would be. And what I'm seeing is, to be honest with you, I'm seeing a lot of pavement here in front of the house. So, okay, but I think I understand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just to address the general intent of that zoning bylaw is to have, like you mentioned, engagement. Those balconies get utilized quite often by us or by our neighbor. And I would argue that removing that space completely to have a cantilever option similar to the one on the left where there is no living room above it, above the garage at all, is less engagement. And the one on the right, the reason why the entrance is a little bit higher is to allow entrance to the secondary dwelling units underneath. So the living room would be higher anyways, to match the entrance of the house. In this case, if there was no front facing attached garages. The one out to talk about the picture that is zoomed out in the report, the width of the driveway there is actually less than the minimum requirement. It's 8 feet wide, so there's not any more of the pavement as required. And then there was no requirement at the time to do soft landscaping. What we're doing on the new property, there's going to be a lot more soft landscaping and trees that will be planted in the front as well to add to the soft landscaping and curb appeal of that property.
Great, thank you for that. Ms. Lacaille?
Can I follow up on that?
Of course.
Because I don't find that the pictures in the application communicate the soft landscaping that will be in the front. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so if we go to the site plan, I think it's on the 3rd or 4th, 5th maybe. Yeah, that one. So the pavement width on that site plan is only 2.6 meters, which is the minimum required pavement width driveway. Everything else, with the exception of the entrance to the side entrance for the secondary dwelling unit, will be soft landscaping. The intent, so where the line is really where the property line is done. So anything past that is city property. However, the intent is to utilize that whole space for soft landscaping, visually add some flowers, trees, shrubs that are perennial, so they don't have to replant it every year. And then by minimizing the depth of the property, the rest of the rear yard of this proposed development will also be soft landscaping. One of the options that are permitted as of right, for example, is the long semi. Actually, a couple of properties down, there's a long semi that was built that received very negative feedback from the neighborhood, but required no variances to be built. There's a big driveway that is on the side of the building to allow for the side attached garages. They actually went ahead and put gravel in the backyard instead of soft landscaping to allow parking, because now you have a driveway all the way to the end of the property. So they're going to utilize the back for parking. It's not, in my opinion, and a lot of the neighbors' opinion, the best use of the development.
And Madam Chair, if I could ask another question, but to Ms. Linker. So we saw a picture of the property immediately adjacent. That is, it appears to be a similar proposal and design. So can we understand how that project got built from a city planning perspective?
Thank you for the question. I am unaware of when the building permit for this application was. However, if it was built prior to before the end of 2020, the streetscape character analysis did get updated to include the analysis of front-facing attached garages. So the 2015 version of the streetscape character analysis did not include that element and instead included an element regarding soft landscaping in the front yard.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have Ms. Young or somebody from forestry with us?
Yes,
Good afternoon.
good afternoon.
All right, I'm just looking at the planning forestry comments in the planning report, and it says that the minor variance does not directly impact the tree in the rear yard, but using the proposed garage area for living space could allow for alternative solutions, such as cantilever to increase the separation between the foundation excavation at the rear from the tree. So do you have any concerns about the impact of construction then on that tree?
Thank you for the question. We have met several times with the applicant now to try to address my concerns. We did have a lot of concerns with the proximity to from excavation for the rear foundation and deck to the tree. So I was concerned about that, but the applicant has worked with his team and considered alternative ways to design the deck and the footings. And we feel now that the design as is, as well as making some changes to the grading in the rear yard, will allow for retention of that tree. So I don't have any concerns anymore related to the minor variance. I just didn't have time to change the report as you would have already reviewed this one. So yeah, I can confirm that my concerns have been resolved, and a new tree information report will need to be provided to forestry through the building permit process.
All right, thank you, Ms. Young. That was very helpful. Okay. Other questions from the committee on any of this? Okay, all right, so let's see. I think we have a number of people on our list, actually. Okay, so I'm going to start with a Ms. Margaret Cody.
Through you, Madam Chair, Margaret Cody does seem to be online. She simply needs to accept the invitation to join as panelist.
Okay, thank you. And just to make sure we can tee up the next person as well, Ms. Donna Kioff. Don't know if that person is, we can bring them both in at the same time. That would be great.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I didn't know whether to join as a panelist or advisor. I've never had to deal with this particular aspect of your technology. So
do you have a video? Can you?
I do have a video option now. I did not before. Let me see. My camera's on, and there we go.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
It shows me at Christmas instead of what my
I was going to say, you must be early.
No, I obviously used this Zoom product last time at Christmas, and I had my Christmas tree up. So let's move on from my Christmas decor. So I received the letter on August 25th about the notice of hearing. I obtained the proposal, and I had a very short time to prepare, but I did my best. And I read the development proposal. I read about the mature neighborhood overlay, which I understand was originally enacted in 2015. And then I read the streetscape character analysis manual. And I did my analysis of the street. I subsequently learned that the characteristics that were assessed originally in 2015 were amended in 2020. And so it's very interesting about that timing of that change, because the property at 529 was purchased in 2019. The building was demolished in 2020, and the construction started in 2020. And then the streetscape character analysis was modified after their building permit was done. If the SCA had been implemented in 2019, then a minor variance would have been required 3 years ago for the 527, 529 property. And we would have had this discussion then, not just now. In my view, the building at 529 overwhelms the modest home at 525. The design of the building at 531-33 would overwhelm the modest home on 537. Having completed the streetscape analysis, I am in agreement that there's only one property, excluding the one that got built next door at the last minute, to allow street-facing garages. So I am opposed to having one built here. And so I would like to encourage the developer and his architect to dare to be different, to set aside the proposed design for another street that has other street facing garages, because actually the ones around the corner on Iona are irrelevant because they're outside the 21 houses that are required. And the street facing garages around the corner are also outside the scope because they're outside the 21. The ones on Iona were built in 2007, prior to the M&A and the SCA. The ones on Clare were built in 2013, again before the M&A and the SCA. So I'd like to encourage the developer and their architect to be different, to set aside this design for another street, to dare to design a semi-detached dwelling with only primary units, not secondary ones, to build a 2-story building instead of a 3-story dwelling and have primary units of 2,500 square feet, to dare to discard the bulky concrete stairs that go up, and to delight us on the street with primary entrances at ground level, to dare to discard the porches that are perched above the front-facing garages and do not engage people on the street. Just because you're using them doesn't mean it engages people on the street. Dare to delight us with porches at ground level, to discard the hardscaping and small trees in the front yards, and dare to delight with charming gardens in the front yards, to provide ample space in the backyards for children to play, to plant more large trees in the backyard to provide ample shade. After several years of the pandemic, we all know that greenery, light, and space are essential for our physical, mental, and emotional health. Even though the city allows what they are proposing to be built, the city and the street do not require large luxury buildings with front-facing attached garages. The city and the street do require affordable, comfortable, well-built homes. Those are my key thoughts.
Thank you, Ms. Cody. Question from the panel for Ms. Cody? All right, good overview. Thank you. We really appreciate your comments, and especially about the neighboring properties. It's always good to hear from somebody who's on the ground.
I've lived here 35 years, so I have had lots of opportunity to become familiar with Laurentian View, and I expect to be here for another 35 years, so I have a vested interest in my street.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to our next speaker then.
Hey, Madam Chair, address some of her concerns either now or later.
Later, let's get them down. Let's get everything down, and then we'll come back to you.
Sounds good.
All right, so Ms. Keough?
Yeah, Kehoe, yes.
Kehoe, thank you. Go
You're
ahead.
welcome. So, thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Donna Kehoe, and I live at 534 Latteroute Avenue. So this is exactly behind where the new proposed development is. Now, I've been trying to get some information about this development from the city, unfortunately, unsuccessfully. I placed a request in on August 24th, but I guess there are 15 business day turnaround time. So I just wanted to talk about two things. One is the tree in the backyard, and the other one is the streetscape analysis. So we've lived in the neighborhood for about 12 years now, and the spruce tree, it's an absolutely gorgeous tree. It's huge. It's 5 stories high, and it really adds to the beauty and enjoyment of the natural environment. And in both summer and winter, because it is a conifer, so we could enjoy it year round. In addition to that, it provides a lot of privacy, again, in the summer and the winter, because it is a conifer. And I think privacy is important. Now, I am in favor of intensification, or I'm not against it. But I do believe that with it, there still needs to be a sense of privacy. If there are existing trees, the development that is being proposed is several stories high, and I've submitted some photos. I'm not sure if they can be shared, But if they can be shared, yes, you will see what I'm referring to. So now this on the left where the tree is, that's the tree, the white spruce tree, and that's the proposed development site. And on the right is a current building, which I believe the new development will look very familiar to. And so I believe that the developer lives in this building here. And as you can see, it's quite high and has a lot of windows. And when that building was built, it did change a bit of the landscape. I know more so with the other neighbors, like on our right and left side on Ladderoute Avenue. Not so much us, but it has a little bit. So for instance, in our family room, which faces our backyard, we no longer can keep our blinds wide open, especially in the evening, because there's a direct line of vision with that property, and that property's windows or curtains are open quite often. So it does interfere a little bit with the privacy. So again, I'm not against intensification, but I am in favor of reconciling that with natural scenery and nature. So I just wanted to mention that at the outset. So now I didn't quite know, as I mentioned, I didn't have a lot of the information that I might have needed. And I did hear some statements this morning, which I was not aware of in terms of keeping the tree. But I did hear from the neighbor, that developer, that he does intend to keep it, but I wasn't aware of that. As I mentioned, we submitted a request to the city to see if an application was submitted to remove the tree, because I know the tree is protected under the city's Tree Protection Act and regulations, and I didn't get a response yet to that. But I think that there's two things. One, the tree. So if the development goes forward and it's the same dimensions as the developer's current property, as you can see, there is a distance of about 25 feet from the back of the property to the tree. And so for that reason, I didn't quite understand initially. As I mentioned, I just learned today that the tree will stay. And if that were the case, I didn't quite understand why the tree couldn't stay. And then I understood eventually that the roots, there may be some issue with the roots reaching into the foundation.
So Ms. Keogh, just on that line.
Yeah.
We heard very clearly from our forestry people that they've now looked at it, worked very closely with the applicant. The tree is no longer an issue. It will stay, and it will be protected.
Now,
so with that, so I'm going to just give another 2 minutes to wrap up at this point.
Okay. Well, I really, I'm very happy to have heard that, but because I haven't seen any record of decisions that in fact will be the case, I decided to continue forward with this presentation.
So the way it works is, should the committee determine that they're going to support the application and grant it, then it would be tied to plans. So the site plans that you may have seen that we just reviewed will in fact be what needs to be done, and any deviation from it means that they don't get their minor variances. So that would be, and I'm not saying that, so the committee hasn't, made a decision on this, but I'm just saying typically they're tied to plans.
Right. Okay. Well, so if I can be guaranteed that the tree will stay, I won't have anything further to say, but as I mentioned, I've been getting information intermittently through any means necessary. And I do wish that the developer would have approached us. I do understand that he approached other people on his street but I wish he would have approached us as well to discuss this initially. And really, the only reason why we found out was because we have a little area in our backyard where a sitting area, and with where our flower beds are, where we sit. And we noticed that the backyard behind us was becoming really unkept, with the grass was about 2 feet high. And we were just wondering what was going on. And it was only when we took a walk around there that we saw the Committee of Adjustment sign. So, I mean, the developer seems like he was very willing to engage with neighbors. He mentioned he spoke to 15 neighbors on his street. I wish he would have spoken to us as well. And the second point I wanted to mention, if you will allow me, Madam Chair, is to talk about the
Got a minute, Ms. Kehoe.
minor variance. Again, I appreciate that the tree will stay. I do need assurances in writing, but I have to contest that the streetscape is not, that the proposed development is not in line with the current streetscape. I went over there this morning and there's 18 houses on that street. It's not a very long street. Not one single house had a front-facing garage except for the developer's own house, which is the one I referred to earlier. So I'm not sure. Well, again, I have to contest that. And while I do agree that on Iona Street, which is a different street, there was some development a few years ago on 3 buildings where there is a front-facing garage. Again, not one single house on Broadview Avenue, Broadhead Avenue, has a front-facing garage, with the one exception of the developer's own house.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kehoe, for that. Then, any questions for Ms. Kehoe? Okay, thank you. So I think we've understood from your presentation. We know the tree is going to stay, and on the street character analysis, we also heard from Ms. Cody, who also provided a very good overview of that from a neighborhood standpoint. So we have that evidence. Thank you very much, ladies. With that, is there anyone else in the audience or online who would like to speak either for or against this application? All right. Okay. Over to you then, Mr. Abdelmian. And you've got a number of things to address, but I don't think we need to talk about the tree anymore.
I agree.
But let's talk about some of the issues with I think the street character analysis is what was raised. Thank you.
For sure. And I mean, that is what we're asking for relief from here today, right? And the fact that the street itself does not meet the analysis requirements of having 11 out of, or the majority out of the 19. The neighborhood in general does. And the fact that the front-facing attached garages is a dominant feature in the neighborhood is what I'm hoping would be in consideration. Miss Cody brought up 525 Broadhead, 537 Broadhead. I would just like to note that both of them support this application. These are the neighbors that are directly north of the property at 527 and 529, and the neighbors directly south of the proposed development. There are 2 letters of support on file from those 2 neighbors. The 15 letters of support are only from our street. So even though the street's character analysis is representative of our street, 15 of those neighbors that are on the street provide support for the development and actually prefer front-facing attached garages in comparison to no garages at all, or the other options that are permitted as of right, the cantilever option or the long semi. And they were happy to sign and provide their letters of support. Some of the things that were brought up again by Ms. Cody, no secondary dwelling units, that goes against the city plan. We were to provide more housing and more opportunities for people to live inside the city. Bulky concrete entrance, that's really just a predeterminant for the entrance below. Porches are engaging. I personally sit on that porch. I say hi to every neighbor that walks by. My parents, when they're visiting, they sit there, they talk to the neighbors across the street. It's a pretty open porch and everyone is at eyesight. hardscaping that will be replaced by softscaping as previously discussed. Ample space in the backyard and ample shade in the backyard. We're maintaining the existing tree. The ample space that is in the backyard, we're not utilizing the full depth of the property based on this proposal. So we're actually adding more space in the backyard for the tenants to enjoy in terms of green space. And I think that addresses all of the concerns that were brought up, unless I missed something.
No, I think that's good. Thank you very much for that overview. With that, then the committee is going to reserve their decision on this, and we think we have quite a bit to think about and to talk about on this one. So we're going to reserve, and you'll get the decision within the required regulated time frame, so within 10 days.
Awesome. Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
very much.
Appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So that takes us then to number 8, which is for 376 Madison. Mr. Saunders. Mr. Saunders, come on down. Yep, come on down.
There we go. Good afternoon, committee, Madam Chair. My name is Rick Morris. I own the property at 376 Madison. Would I be able to get the presentation slides brought up from Foten?
So just before you go there, let me just, so I was expecting Mr. Saunders, so.
I'm Rick Morris. Yeah, he's with Foten. He will be also speaking if that's possible.
Oh, he's on.
afternoon, Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
So who's taking the lead on this?
I was just going to say a few words
Okay,
and then he can answer or provide a technical presentation.
all right, so we do need to do some housekeeping on this. So how about I let you open it, Mr. Morris, and then we will need to, and I'm looking for what the changes are, though. I thought we did have housekeeping changes on this. Hang on. Just let me catch up, make sure I haven't missed anything. No, wait, okay. Hang on, let me catch up. No, it doesn't look like there is any housekeeping. Ms. Linker, can you just confirm that for me? Sometimes it's right in the planning report, but for whatever reason, I've got notes to myself that there's housekeeping changes. Anything from your end?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just scrolling to my report right now to double check. I don't believe that staff made any changes to the notice of the application.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to miss anything. So over to you, Mr. Morris.
Okay. Second slide, please. So this property is located on a block in Westboro, just west of Churchill. So it's surrounded by Richmond Road, Churchill, Winston Avenue to the west, and then Madison to the north. The entire property is zoned TM, other than a couple of properties that are at the eastern end of that block, one which is a church and the other which is a City of Ottawa Community Center, Seniors Center. The rest of the properties are all TM. Same on the north side, same on the south side between Richmond Road and Danforth. And so the little property at 376 Madison faces Madison Avenue. However, it has that TM zone and therefore I'll say gets caught by that requirement that even though office use and research and development use are allowed, they're not allowed within the first 6 meters of the front wall. And I own a number of other properties along Richmond Road in Wellington. And so I understand the desire to have the animation on those traditional main streets, and therefore, the requirement to have those office type uses further back from the front But in this particular situation, Madison Avenue isn't really operating as a traditional main street. In fact, I think I know it is the only building on Madison Avenue that faces Madison Avenue. So we are obviously seeking relief from that requirement in the zoning bylaw, because we just don't think it's appropriate in this context.
Great, thank you. To the members of the panel, I'm just wondering whether or not we even need a presentation. We can maybe just go to questions. Yeah, all right, let's do that. Okay, so Mr. Saunders, no presentation required from you, but thank you. So, but with that then, questions? Go ahead, please, Madam, or sorry, Member Leckie.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at the city's report on forestry and looking for opportunities to depave. I noticed there's a lot of hard landscaping in the area. Is there anything in the plans to address that concern, or is there any possibility?
I can defer to Mr. Morris for this as it relates to the plans, as this variance doesn't directly apply or doesn't directly relate to any specific plans. It more relates to the actual uses on the internal to the building. The addition that's spoken about within the plan, within the cover letter and rationale accompanying this application, relates to the addition that has gone through building permit process and is more or less contingent. Its pursuit is contingent on this application, more or less, but more directly related to your application, to your question. Sorry, I'll defer to Mr. Morris on that.
Yeah, so your question was regarding forestry?
Forestry's comment in the report about the desire for repaving, given the significant amount of hard landscaping in the area.
Yeah, there are. There's not a single tree anywhere on that site. It's a gravel parking lot, all the way from Madison Avenue up until our office building, which faces Richmond Road. I know the rock depth there is probably no more than 3 feet below grade. I think it's going to be impossible to plant any trees. They're not going to live.
Thank you.
I know that's not probably what you wanted to hear, but I just don't see how it's possible to do.
So, Mr. Morris, you know, it's funny. We have a lake home, and I've got trees growing out of boulders, and I'm not sure how that's happening. So, when I hear that, I go, "Oh, I've got weeds and things growing in places that defy logic." But somehow, and I think this is all that forestry is saying is if there's an opportunity at all, consider just greening the front a little is what they're saying. So obviously not tied to the application.
Yeah,
it's an observation.
Can we go maybe then to the first slide where we actually have the front elevation of the building, and the only thing I can think of here is a raised planter. So
I can see why
the city placed those concrete curbs to delineate the right of way. Clearly, there's a little bit of space which is on our property before you get to the front wall of the building. If that would make a difference, we can consider putting a raised planter, concrete planter, from Central Precast with something planted in it. I'd have to speak with. We'd probably speak with Gino Aiello, who's the landscape architect that we use.
Again, it's a recommendation from forestry, not tied necessarily, well, not tied to the application, but based on your picture, I can definitely see why they've made that recommendation. So if you're inclined to talk to your landscape architect, please do. So
yeah, I'm not opposed to that if that assists. This is obviously dealing with the use of the property versus any sort of physical changes. The building permit is ready for pickup. It nothing to do with this variance where the property is not currently rented. We're looking to be able to market it, if possible, for an office use also.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Want to miss anybody? Okay. All right, so we've got, do we have anybody? No, we have nobody on the speakers list. So is there anyone in the audience, either in person or online, who would like to speak to this application? I'm not seeing anybody come forward. Okay. Ms. Linker, just before we close off on this, anything further that we should know?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's nothing further from city staff.
Perfect. Then final words, Mr. Morris, Mr. Sanders.
I don't have any. Thank you for your time.
No words. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well then the committee is going to reserve on this, so you will get your decision within the 10-day time frame.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, so the next application is 470 Mutual, looking for Mr. Segreto.
Okay. Hello.
Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Segreto.
Good afternoon.
Okay, before we go into this, your application does need, maybe that's the one that I had the notes for without realizing. Let me catch up. So my understanding is that we need to delete from the notice variance F.
That's correct.
Okay, so if you're confirming that, then for the record, the variance relating to A00159 is F, which is to permit a reduced soft landscaped area, is deleted. So, all right, perfect. I think that was the only one I had here that we needed to go over. So I don't think we need a presentation from the members on this, so I'm going to open it up directly to questions to you, though. Two applications, consent and minor variance. Anything from the members? Okay. All right. If there's no questions, then I'm just going to go to, we don't have anybody on the docket to speak to these applications because we're looking at two applications here. So is there anyone in the audience or online who would like to speak to either the consent application for 470 Mutual or for the minor variance applications? And this is to subdivide a property into 3. And there are a number of minor variances. Anyone? So I don't see anybody coming forward then to speak to the committee on any of this. The committee has had a chance to go through this, Mr. Segreto. Have you had a chance to look at the conditions?
I reviewed all the conditions. I don't have any issues with any of them, with the exception of the overlay, the asphalt overlay. I don't understand why that has to be a condition.
All right, so we see that all the time. Which one is that?
I think it's condition 7.
Condition 7, yeah. All right, so in this case, you are creating new lots, so I'm not sure why there's confusion on this one, Mr. Segreto.
I think the excavation guys are the guys that should be responsible for that. They're bonded for the road, the city road. Why should we take responsibility? Anyways, if it means including it, include it, that's fine, but I just don't think it's right to have it there.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you're accepting because it's actually very often part of the conditions, and if you fight with somebody and then have it removed if that's the way it goes. So great. Gonna let it stand. Other than that, looks pretty straightforward. Ms. Linker, anything again that we should be aware of?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff appreciate the updated plans from the last hearing and the removal of the one condition requesting reduced soft landscaping. So there's no further comments from staff.
All right, so with that then, Mr. Segredo, any final words before
I'm
we?
good.
Okay,
I'm
well,
good.
in that case, we are reserving on both of them again. So thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, so I believe that takes us to the end of our agenda with number 11. With number 11, because we still have Mr. Chown and Ms. Sewer in the audience. I knew there was still something we needed to deal with, so for the record, the next application to be heard is 31 Gordon. And on this one, let me go back and see, I have notes as to whether or not, okay, so the first thing we have to do, it's a permission application. And the first thing we're going to do is amend the notice. So what I think we're proposing to do here is everything after applicant's proposal and purpose of the application. So strike that and everything to the end of variance B, if I can get there, hang on. Yeah, everything to the end of variance B, and we will replace that with something much simpler. The owner requires the permission of the committee to expand the existing legal conforming single detached dwelling to permit the construction of a second-story addition. We confirmed? Perfect. Okay, so with that, I believe that's the only amendment that we need. There's two. Ms. Linker, am I missing one?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe you went through the requested change from staff about the description of the permission. Is there another change that you were looking for?
No, it's just, I mean, as long as it's just that one that we just read through for the record.
I believe that you've read that correctly.
Okay, all right. Well, if that's it, then good. We'll leave that one. All right. So with that, we are going to go to just questions, if that's all right, on this. So members of the panel, any questions on our permission? I think it's kind of clear what it is that we're doing. There's no concerns from staff on this one. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So, okay, so no questions. I do have a speaker on this one. Ms. Lewis, do we have Ms. Lewis?
Through you, Madam Chair, Ms. Lewis does not appear to be online.
All right, so Ms. Lewis. Okay, so she had registered, but she's not come forward. We do have her comments in any event though, so that's good. And you've seen Ms. Lewis's comments?
Yes, we have.
All right. Is there anyone else in the audience online that would like to speak to this application, either for or against? Okay, not seeing anybody come forward. There are no conditions, just comments. So with that, then, Ms. Linker, final words.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff continue to have no concerns with the permission application.
Excellent. Final words then from our agents.
Nothing to say, Madam Chair.
This is a good note to end a hearing on. So I'm surprised that we didn't, I guess it's because we had to amend the notice that we couldn't go to an unopposed, so we could have dealt with you like right at the beginning. So don't do anything on your notices, because then you can get through faster. I think that's the lesson. So I don't have any problem going to a vote on this one, members. Okay, so all those in favor? All right, for the record, the application is granted. So thanks so much for waiting all this time, all afternoon.
There's an entertaining, particularly the discussion about the lapsing of the consent application. I would offer you my opinion, but I won't do that.
Oh, maybe you can give me your opinion over wine or something sometime at some
Send me an
function.
email and I'll give you my opinion.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I think, am I looking for any opposition to closing the hearing? Or we used to go to a vote. Somebody in favor, all right. So I'm gonna continue with that because I'm really confused. So we have a motion to adjourn the hearing and we have a seconder? Thank you. Because otherwise I'm not sure how to close this thing, because it's like, are we all in agreement that we're done? Like, it seems like that's kind of how you have to finish these things. So anyway, with that then, great. Thanks to everybody for your time, planning staff, forestry staff, and of course our committee staff. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.